Welcome along, fellow time travelers and fans of the Beatles. In this micro lesson, we're going to travel back in time to 1966 to check out Chiswick House and the production of the Beatles' Paperback Writer promotional film. The reason for micro lessons such as this is to celebrate the hard work and great triumphs of great visionary people. It is also to help people understand what the architectural and design elements are when they look at buildings and gardens. Also, studying architecture and garden design can help people increase their powers of observation that could be used in other areas of their lives. Listen, everybody. I know that most people listening to this are only interested in hearing about the Beatles and seeing photos of how handsome they were when they were in their 20s and talking about their music. I get it. I wasn't born yesterday. I understand. I really do. But it seems to me that being interested in the Beatles could also help generate some interest in other people and places and things that they were associated with, either directly or indirectly. So, yeah, I'm going to be talking about the Beatles in this micro lesson. But I'm also going to talk about other stuff too. So hang tight, because it's possible that you may learn some really interesting stuff that you never, ever thought about before, because nobody ever mentioned them before. So what you're listening to right now is the extended version of this video. If you just want to hear about the Beatles stuff, you can go ahead and check out that version, which is also available. So let's get rolling. If you are watching this video, you are likely quite aware that the song Paperback Writer was performed by the Beatles. It was written primarily by Paul McCartney and credited to Lennon-McCartney, since that was the deal that those guys made. The song was released in May of 1966 as the A-side of their 11th single. The inspiration for the song has changed over time, depending upon who Paul McCartney has spoken to and what he feels like saying at any particular time. That seems to be a thing with him, as everybody knows, which is fine. I mean, he pumped out so many songs over the course of his life that it's probably nearly impossible to remember everything about the creation of every song. So maybe you make some stuff up every once in a while or fill in the blanks. But for those who are interested in that sort of thing, Paul has said that he read an article about an aspiring author, and that got him going to write the song Paperback Writer. Another story told by Paul about the inspiration was that one of Paul's aunts asked him why he always wrote about love and suggested that he write about something else, like maybe a horse or something. And so Paul decided to find something else to write about. Another story told by Paul was that once he saw Ringo reading a book, and one of them, it's not clear who, declared that they wanted to write a song about a book. Now, I don't understand that story. So was it that Ringo said that he wanted to write a song about a book, and then Paul went and did that before Ringo did? Or did Paul see Ringo reading a book, and then he said, oh, I want to write a song about a book? I have no idea. If anybody knows the true story, please leave them in the comments below. Oh, Paul has also said that there was no real-life story or people behind the story that he was consciously aware of, but he wanted to write a song that sounded like the writing of a letter to a publisher. But no matter the inspiration, Paul went to John Lennon's house for a songwriting session, and he told John about the idea of writing a song that sounded like somebody writing a letter. And together, as they often would in those early days, they worked out the lyrics and they put a melody to it. There's obviously a lot more to say about the writing and production of the song Paperback Writer, but that's not really my area of expertise, and all that information is easily found elsewhere. So that's just some general information that I came across concerning the writing of the song. Now let's talk about the promotional film. At that point in their careers, the Beatles were very busy, so they decided to make some promotional films of them performing that they could give to TV programs. Brian Epstein and his team set out on a task to hire a director who could make that happen. They decided upon an American-born director named Michael Lindsay Hogg. The director was born in New York City in 1940. His mother was actress Geraldine Fitzgerald. He was raised by Sir Edward Lindsay Hogg, but legend has it that his biological father was Orson Welles, who his mother knew very well. This guy had an interesting career. It began in 1965, so he was, 24, 25 years old, and he was directing episodes of the British pop program Ready, Steady, Go. He worked with the Rolling Stones and the Yardbirds and the Who and a whole bunch others. Brian Epstein arranged for the director to meet with the Beatles. His plan was to hire him to direct promotional films for both Paperback Writer and Rain, which was the B-side of the single. So the director zoomed on down to Abbey Road, and he pitched an idea for a video that would tell the story of someone working in a newspaper office who was an aspiring novelist. The Beatles thought that was a cool idea, so Mr. Lindsay Hogg went off to develop the idea further. But he didn't get a chance to get too far, because a few days later, Brian Epstein decided he didn't want to do anything weird or unusual for the film, and that it would be best to just film the Beatles performing the song. And so that's what they planned to do, with Tony Bramwell being the producer. They shot promos for both songs in the recording studio on May 19th, 1966. During the next day, the Beatles and others who worked with them and the film crew met at the legendary Chiswick House in West London. Now let's talk a little bit about the history of Chiswick House. But before we do, let me just say that I did not pronounce Chiswick House incorrectly. Yeah, I know that some of you probably think it's pronounced Chiswick House because there's a W in there, but nobody in England pronounces it that way. So I'm not going to either. Now, if it was up to me, I'd probably say Chiswick, but it's not up to me. So it's Chiswick. It's located about 8 miles from Abbey Road Studios, but it takes about 25 to 30 minutes to get there, depending on what kind of traffic you're dealing with. It's really an amazing place. First of all, it has a Neo-Palladian style villa. Now you might be asking yourself, what's Scott Cardinal talking about? I don't know what Neo-Palladian is. What on earth is that? Well, it's an architectural style that was inspired by the designs of Venetian architect Andrea Palladio, who lived throughout most of the 1500s. Seriously, I'm not joking about that. This guy lived for a long time. He was born in 1508, and he didn't die until 1580.
Wow.
So can you imagine living to be 72 years old in those days? It's pretty amazing, right? Now, Palladio's work was really influential because it was strongly based on the symmetry, perspective, and values of the formal classical temple architecture of the ancient Greeks and Romans. But he wasn't just focused on the exterior of the buildings. You see, the insides he was really interested in too, and those were filled with elaborate decoration, gilding, and ornamentation that creates a lavish, opulent environment. The house was designed and built by Richard Boyle. He was the 3rd Earl of Burlington, so he was the Lord of Burlington. Now you might be asking, who in the world was Lord Burlington? I'm glad you asked. He was an interesting fellow. He was born in 1694. And he passed away in 1753.
Wow.
He was an Anglo-Irish architect who was a builder and patron of architects, craftsmen, and landscapers. Some of his major projects can still be seen today, including Burlington House, Westminster School, obviously Chiswick House, and Northwick Park. You see, what he wanted to do is create for himself and his family a Roman-style villa, and it was completed in 1729. Lord Burlington designed the villa with the aid of William Kent, who also took a leading role in designing the gardens. Now at this point you might be asking yourself, who was William Kent? He was an eminent English architect, landscape architect, painter, and furniture designer. And along with Lord Burlington, he is credited with introducing the Palladian style of architecture into England with the villa at Chiswick House. Kent also originated the natural style of gardening known as the English landscape garden. In fact, he single-handedly revolutionized the landscape layout of an assortment of English country estates. Now let's talk a little bit about the house. The house is often said to be directly inspired by Palladio's Villa Capra, the rotunda near Vicenza in Italy. Once the house was completed, it got mixed reviews because it seemed to be an unusual place to actually live. But it's been said that Lord Burlington actually built the villa for the benefit of housing his vast art collection and select pieces of furniture that were purchased on his first grand tour of Europe all the way back in 1714. The brick-built villa's facade is faced in Portland stone, and there are finely carved Corinthian capitals on the projecting 6-column portico. At the top is a steep-pitched dome of the villa with an octagonal form. There are sections of crenellated wall with ball finials which extend out either side of the villa. And there are 2 full-length statues positioned in front of those sections of wall. The villa is a half cube of 70 feet by 70 feet by 35 feet, and the distance from the apex of the dome to the base of the cellar is 70 feet, making the whole thing fit within a perfect, invisible cube. Now let's talk about Chiswick Gardens. The house and garden occupy just over 65 acres. As previously mentioned, the garden was created mainly by architect and landscape designer William Kent, and it is one of the earliest examples of the English landscape garden. Now you might be asking yourself, what on earth is meant by English landscape garden? Well, for starters, it was a new style that was invented by William Kent and Charles Bridgman. The English landscape garden is a style of landscape garden which emerged in England in the early 18th century. And there's a lot more to talk about English landscape gardening, but this video will go on forever, so I'll go ahead and make another one just to talk about that. The gardens at Chiswick were an attempt to symbolically recreate a garden of ancient Rome. And over the course of time, the gardens at Chiswick were in a constant state of transition as Lord Burlington and Kent experimented with new design ideas. Now let's talk about the conservatory. The conservatory was commissioned by the 6th Duke of Devonshire. He was the great-grandson of Lord Burlington. It was designed by Samuel Ware. He built Burlington Arcade in Piccadilly. The conservatory was completed in 1813. It was one of the earliest large glass houses to be built. The conservatory was originally used for growing fruit in the end pavilions, and the building was divided into a series of compartments, which were heated to maintain different climates, so fruit could ripen successively instead of all at one time. Now in 1828, the 6th Duke switched away from produce and he introduced camellias. And behind that you can find a kitchen garden at Chiswick House, and that was built in 1682. Now let's talk a little bit about Chiswick's history. After Burlington's death in 1753, his wife, Lady Dorothy Saville, and daughter, Charlotte, inherited the house. Charlotte died in December of 1754, and Lady Burlington died in September 1758. At that point, the property was ceded to Charlotte's husband, William Cavendish. He was the 4th Duke of Devonshire. After William's death in 1764, the villa passed to his and Charlotte's orphaned young son, William Cavendish, who was the 5th Duke of Devonshire. During the 19th century, the house fell into decline and it was rented out by the Cavendish family. Beginning in 1892, it was used as a mental hospital, and it was called the Chiswick Asylum. In 1929, the 9th Duke of Devonshire sold Chiswick House to the Middlesex County Council, and it became a fire station, with Green Goddess fire engines parked on its forecourt. During World War II, the building suffered vibration damage from heavy bombing in the Chiswick area. In 1944, the first V-2 rocket to hit London landed in nearby Staveley Road. It killed 3 people and it damaged one of the wings of the house. After the war, in 1956, the Patience Wings and many other outbuildings were demolished by the Ministry of Works, which later became English Heritage. The grounds were opened to the public in 1958, while the house underwent a 10-year-long restoration. Now let's talk about the Paperback Rider promotional film. In the morning of May 20th, 1966, director Michael Lindsay Hogg, Brian Epstein, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Ringo Starr, Neil Aspinall, Mal Evans, the Beatles press officer Tony Barrow, and others who worked with the Beatles arrived at Chiswick House. The temperature that day was a high of 78 and a low of 42. Director Michael Lindsay Hogg was working with a crew that was supplied by Intertel Television. Unlike the previous day, which was shot on videotape, this day's footage was captured on 35mm color film. The plan was to have the Beatles performing in various locations on the property, miming to the entire song or certain portions of the song, while the director shot from various angles that could be creatively edited together. Now let's talk about the first cut. The promotional film starts off with a close-up of George Harrison, and then John Lennon, and then Ringo, and then Paul, all of whom look absolutely bored out of their minds. Why in the world they weren't shown doing something fun or interesting is anyone's guess. But it doesn't last very long because the instruments kick in, and there's another cut which shows a close-up of a profile of a Herma in the gardens of Chiswick. Now you might be asking yourself, what in the world is a Herma? It's a sculpture with a head and perhaps a torso above a plain, usually squared lower section on which male genitals may also be carved at the appropriate height. In ancient Greece, Herma statues were thought to ward off harm or evil, and so they were usually placed outside of houses. We then go on to cut 3, which shows them in the glass house with Chiswick's legendary, centuries-old camellia collection. There is a marble statue of a female figure in the foreground, with Paul on the far left and Lennon on the right with his arm wrapped around a pole. And for reasons unknown, Neil Aspinall is standing behind Lennon. There also seems to be a jacket and some cables on the ground to the left of Lennon. And one could only assume that this was just a test shot or something, and it was never meant to be used in the actual promotional film, but maybe they needed an additional shot or something, and so here it is. Then there's the next cut, which shows another close-up shot of the Herma that was shown previously, and then the camera kind of pulls back to show the Beatles performing in the Excedra. Now you might be saying to yourself, oh no, what's Scott Cardinal talking about now? I don't know what an Excedra is. Do you think he'll tell us? I will. During the 18th century, an Excedra became a popular garden feature or folly, often used as an ornamental curved screening wall to hide another part of the garden or as a suitable place for conversation. And it's often used to display statues. The 3 statues behind the Beatles are copies of antique statues that are said to represent Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, and Marcus Cicero. Paul can be seen in the foreground wearing either a very dark blue jacket or a black jacket with at least one breast pocket and a beige turtleneck. He's playing his Hofner bass, and the bass is left-handed and shaped like a violin with antique brown sunburst finish. To his right is John, who is wearing a dark blue jacket with wide beige lapels and a dark purple turtleneck. As you can see, his sunglasses were metal-rimmed with wide brown lenses. And he's playing his Epiphone Casino with a sunburst finish. To Lennon's right could be seen George, who is wearing a dark green jacket and a brown button-down shirt with white undershirt. He had dark greenish pants and brown shoes. And in his pocket was a pair of slender, round-shaped sunglasses with metal frames and black lenses. And he was playing his red Gibson SG Standard. And behind them are alternating cypresses and enormous stone urns. Leaning against one of the pedestals of the urns stands Ringo, who is wearing a very attractive 2-piece suit with black and gray striped fabric and a dark purple turtleneck shirt. On his feet were black boots, and in his pocket were a pair of slender, oval-shaped sunglasses with metal frames and blue lenses. In the next cut, the camera pulls back from Paul's bass to reveal a red camellia and then showing the Beatles inside the conservatory. In the next cut, we see George and John from the side playing their guitars next to one of the large urns in the Excedra. And then in the next cut, the Beatles are back in the conservatory with a glorious display of red camellia behind and to the side of Lennon as the camera zooms in on him. In the next cut, it is revealed that Ringo is seated on the ground of the conservatory on a mosaic of colored stones. Since he has no drums to play, he's just sort of sitting there like a child whose teacher told him to go sit in the corner.
David, are you with us?
This jitteriness, the constant motion, is what neurologists call hyperkinetic behavior. For these children, just sitting still is an ordeal.
All right, David. Keep your eyes on your own paper.
In the next cut, the camera is low to the ground and directly in front of Ringo, and the others can be seen playing their instruments behind him. And we see beautiful pink camellia behind and to the side of Paul, and looking up you can see that they are beneath the central glass dome showing the gray skies above. And then in the next cut, you see a close-up profile view of George Harrison and John Lennon. And then after that, you got a series of cuts showing close-ups of the Beatles removing their sunglasses in quick succession and looking directly into the camera's lens. In the next cut, the camera pulls out of wisteria in full bloom to show the Beatles seated on a bench outside the conservatory. And they're all leaning back, except for John Lennon, who was leaning forward. And then there's a close-up of Ringo's face. And I gotta be honest with you guys, at this point in watching the promotional film, you really have to wonder if anybody liked Ringo. It makes you wonder if the director was mad at him or something, because every time you see Ringo, which is very rare, he either looks like he's attending a funeral, looking all depressed, or he looks like he was committed to a mental institution. So I don't know why they didn't treat him a little bit better, give him something to do. But either way, the camera pans left, but instead of showing Paul, who was seated next to him, there is a very quick edit that shows Lennon leaning forward, and then he sits back and we see George Harrison staring out into space. The next cut shows the band back in the conservatory with Paul on the left and a red camellia in the foreground. And then the next shot shows Ringo looking cool. Pretty cool. Leaning against the pedestal of the urn in the Excedra with quite a bit of gold jewelry on his wrists and fingers. And then you get the close-up of Paul in the conservatory where we get the best view yet of his chipped tooth. Which, in all honesty, it's a bit disgusting to see, and it would have been nice to not have to see somebody, especially Paul McCartney, singing with a broken tooth. But I suppose there are probably plenty of people who find that endearing, and so I will say no more about it. George Harrison is behind him, and then the camera pans to the right to reveal John Lennon and George Harrison to the left. Then the camera is on the side of Paul, who turns his head quickly toward it, once again giving us a rather unpleasant view of his damaged tooth. Then the band is back in the conservatory, zooming out from Lennon and then Paul. There is then a close-up of John Lennon, and then a close-up of Paul, and then the camera pans back to John Lennon and George Harrison. And then the three of them are back in the conservatory. And at this point, you'd probably be forgiven if you were wondering if Ringo went home early. Until we see Ringo once again seated on the floor. Then there is a nice shot of John Lennon with green leaves in the background and a blur of green above his head. And then the camera zooms back, revealing George Harrison and then Paul McCartney. And then Paul continues to mime the chorus even though there isn't any audio. But the scene sure looks nice and really lush with a background of thick, glossy green leaves behind him. So that's pretty much for the shooting of that video, where it has it that between the takes, the Beatles spent a lot of time talking and smoking in the cafe that was built in the 1950s. And as the shoot went on, members of the public did find out about them being there, and they came to watch, but they didn't bug them or distract them from the shoot in any way. But as the crowd got bigger, the Beatles spent time in the potting sheds in the back of the conservatory where the peacocks were kept. As a matter of fact, during one long break, John Lennon asked one of the gardeners if he could ride his bike around. It was called a Moulton, and the others watched as Lennon cycled within the walled garden.
In 1962, something radical happened. A new bicycle came on the market, this time with small wheels. Its designer was Alex Moulton. Observe how he used materials in novel ways to deal with such mechanics problems as compression, shear, strength, and stiffness. You may disagree with his approach to design. You may disagree with his solutions. Think about it for yourself, for there isn't a unique solution to any design problem.
After the shoot, the director had to work really fast on the edit, because on June 2nd, 1966, it would be broadcast on BBC TV's Top of the Pops. Now, if you like, you can go to Chiswick House today and you could stand and walk where the Beatles did, because today the house is a Grade 1 listed building and is maintained by English Heritage. And so this concludes this micro lesson about the Beatles' paperback writer promotional film at Chiswick House. If you want to support my research, please sign up for a subscription at my website, audibleadventures.com. That website also has a page with links to all of my books. You could download the Audible Adventures app for iPhone and Android. In the description below is a link if you want to make a donation to support my research and productions. If you have any thoughts about this subject matter at all, including why they treated Ringo like a mental patient, or why Paul was singing with a broken tooth, or anything about the song or the video or anything else you like, please go ahead and add those comments below and share what's on your mind. If you enjoy this video, please share it and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Until next time, I wish you safe travels on all your journeys.